In a landmark new deal, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan and Turkey have signed what is a new NATO-style defence pact. The signing took place in Mecca, which of course is Islam's holiest city. Tehran was quick to respond, saying the deal will not ensure Riyadh's security. Well, Yasmin Farouk is project director for the Gulf and Arabian Peninsula at the International Crisis Group, joining us today from Paris, and it's good to have you. Let's just have a look at the sort of big picture, end of this week. What is your understanding of the diplomacy around, and let's start with the Strait of Hormuz at this point?
So at this point, I think, Becky, we are very clearly seeing that there is a consensus in the region and there's a push by the region to find a way out of this war, starting with the Strait of Hormuz. So even if the outcome is not the best outcome that the Gulf countries and the rest of the region would have wanted to see, but it is better than resuming the war and resuming the strikes on Iran. And hence we see Gulf countries insisting on a temporary arrangement with Iran that leaves Iran at least seemingly having more control than they were willing to allow it to have over the strait. We are also seeing more coordination with the Omani side and the other GCC countries than we had seen previously during this war.
I'm really interested to get your thoughts on this pact we've seen signed today in Mecca between Saudi, Turkey and Pakistan. An historic moment today. It's a pact long in the making. You and I have been following these three countries and Egypt's regional alignment for a long time. You've written that it, quote, reflects a hard-won realization amongst these four states. Security in their neighborhood can no longer be left at the mercy of rivalry between the US and Israel on the one side and Iran on the other. Egypt, of course, not specifically in this defence pact today. This is a sort of NATO-style pact. And I want to get your thoughts on its significance and its consequence. And I have to say, we've just heard from the Turkish communications director for the presidency, who says that this pact isn't sort of aimed or directed at any one country. We've had a pretty negative response to it, of course, from Iran already today.
Look, Becky, if you remember when Saudi Arabia and Iran signed that pact, it was in September of 2025. And immediately afterwards, we started hearing that the Saudi-Pakistan defense agreement was going to be regionalized, that there were discussions of a regional defense pact, insisting that it is not against a specific country. And here, what the two countries had in mind is that this is not against Iran, but it is meant to deter Iran and any other country, including Israel, that had just attacked Saudi Arabia's neighbor, which is Qatar. You had a confirmation in January of this year from both the Turkish foreign minister and the Pakistani defense minister that indeed some kind of regional agreement was being discussed. It is very clear, even if the countries do not want to use it and stress that it is a defensive pact, that it is coming at a moment where the region is absorbing the rebounds of the war, Becky. We are seeing, the conflicts being metastasized in the region, whether involving Saudi Arabia and Iraq, Saudi Arabia and Yemen. We have seen an attack on Egypt. So while you are seeing a de-escalation between Iran and the US pushed by the region, you have a new layer of regional conflict that is threatening to continue despite that de-escalation. And this explains this move by the three countries. But I also expect to see other moves among other countries in the region heading in the same deterrence and defense direction.
Yeah, fascinating. What we are clearly seeing is an additional layer of defense, as it were, for the kingdom. You talk about recognizing that the US cannot be the only defense partner, and we are seeing more sort of coordinated action and rhetoric from the GCC as a whole when it comes to regional security. I mean, they've got various different sort of narratives when it comes to where they are at as far as bilateral agreements, perhaps with Iran and all the rest of it. But certainly regional security is a tightly coordinated pact at this point. I want to talk about the US and Donald Trump at this point. The latest US jobs report shows an unexpected loss of more than 20,000 jobs. We are less than 90 days away from the midterm elections. Those I speak to in the Gulf region, acknowledge that Donald Trump's focus is increasingly likely to be on domestic politics. How do you think the Gulf region is navigating what is this US political picture ahead of midterm elections? And what is their sort of ultimate kind of outlook at this point?
Look, I feel that this kind of regional reconfiguration of defense, of coordination, of significantly less public divergences than we saw during this war as part of this reaction, Becky. These are countries, all of them are US partners, and they still prioritize their strategic relationship with the United States, and they will continue to, including Turkey and Pakistan, by the way. And so the reaction to what has been very honestly a very hectic strategy in their own region, but also a US focus on domestic politics, and hence a more incentive to end the war, is by the region trying to come together, but also supplementing it with a layer of international strategic partnerships. We have seen countries like the UAE, but also Qatar and Saudi Arabia itself, approach other countries, particularly in Europe, for example, for enhanced defense agreements. And so while the United States' role, presence, and power projection will continue to be valued, the Gulf countries know that it should no longer be guaranteed or taken for, accomplished, that these elections might change things, that the war itself might change the American footprint in the region, and they are racing against the clock, whether trying to find a modus vivendi with Iran, whether coming together, whether concluding their own regional and also international defense agreements in reaction to these politics in the US. Excuse me.
And finally, because I just want to wrap up this week that we've just lived and reported through, maritime security. We started talking about the Strait of Hormuz. There is, of course, another really strategic chokehold, the Bab al-Mandeb in the Red Sea, bottom of Saudi Arabia, Yemen. We have seen again this week a significant sort of pact coming together for securing those waterways. Again, Egypt, Pakistan, Turkey playing a role there in offering some sort of policing of that area. And I know, having spoken to sources around the region, again, the region leaning into the Europeans and others, we may see evidence out loud of some of the support from others, perhaps other support behind the scenes. I guess sort of my closing question is, we've got this maritime security story, we've got the wider defense and security story, Saudi saying they expect to get further attacks from the south, from the Houthis, from the north, from the Iran-backed aligned groups in Iraq. You step back and take a sort of 30,000-foot look at what is going on. What do you make of these? I don't know whether to describe these as shaping or sort of shifting alliances, whether they are deepening alliances, the wider story when we talk about navigating what might be a new and different looking Middle East. What's your sort of 30,000-foot perspective at this point?
I see from that, if you zoom out, if you want, I see two tracks. I see the track that wants the war to end, so a track of de-escalation, but I also see the region stepping up, Becky. And we have seen it stepping up not only by building coalitions and being willing to, put something on the table and not just calling, maritime, the freedom of maritime navigation as an international responsibility in an abstract way. What we are seeing is the region willing to invest in implementing its own security. We are seeing it through direct military strikes in Iraq and Yemen, which is something that is dangerous, that we don't want to see, that we hope to end with the end of the US-Iran war. But we're also seeing a willingness to invest resources in maritime security, which was not the case before this, Becky. the Gulf countries' position has always been that this is an international responsibility, that the UN, the international community, the US should be doing this. What I am seeing is the region stepping up and saying, okay, we are willing to contribute to this, but in partnership with this international community that should be playing the role as well. And I expect this to continue. And I hope it leads to more convergence and not to divergence. And it was promising to see the number of countries that came together in Riyadh for that meeting. I'm sure it did not escape you, as it did not escape me, that countries that were publicly very divergent at the beginning of this war among the GCC itself were present in Riyadh.
Yeah, I think you're making some really, really good points. I mean, those waterways, international, and you're right, you know, from the outset, these countries have said, look, it's everybody's responsibility. But this effort to really take some sort of ownership of this with others is, of course, important. These are international waterways which, at the end of the day, feed the world economy. And we've seen the impact of these sort of this economic terrorism, call it that, if you will, certainly the line from the UAE, on the world economy and people, you know, thousands of miles away.